Live, according to all the computer, what it's telling me. Hello, James. How are you?
I'm well. How are you, Amy?
I'm doing okay. Welcome everyone to None of the Above. And you see, it is just me and James today. That's all we have is me and James. We don't have a guest today. So it's, do you feel like a little nervous about this, James?
Well, we're pretty good at riffing.
We can riff. And actually I thought, because we restarted our second season now that my health is permitting and everything else.
You look good, by the way.
Well, okay, thanks. So I have makeup on and stuff. I got the big relief yesterday, which was I had to get on a scale and see if I can actually maintain weight on a keto diet. Because, I'm jealous of all you people, right? You guys are doing keto, you're going to lose weight or whatever. And I need to do it for health reasons. And it's kind of an uphill battle to maintain or gain weight on keto. And so, the question was, could I do it? Could I do it? And I hadn't weighed myself for 6 days or something. And I was dreading it. And I got on the scale. I was like, okay, at least I've maintained. Maybe I've gained a tiny bit, but I don't know. It's hard to tell because, weight goes
Yeah,
up and down through a day or whatever. But
yeah,
it's like, I'm in the ballpark of exactly where I was last week. It's like, okay, I can do this, and it just means work a little harder, then gain some weight.
yeah.
And
Now we need to see whether you can pick up a few pounds.
Exactly. Yeah. Well, more than a few, maybe 10. That would be beautiful. My goal is at least 5, but 10 is ideal. So yeah, we're going to go for it.
Manger.
But yeah, no. And, in terms of all of the symptoms that I'm trying to combat by doing this diet, those are in line. So I'm seeing an effect of it. I've got people over here in the chat room at YouTube who are now, for the first time in their lives, only because of me now. The only reason I had to do it was recently because of what I have, but there's something called SIBO, which I had never known about before. It's called small intestinal bacterial overgrowth, and it can cause a variety of uncomfortable symptoms. I learned, I'm always learning. I just keep reading and reading and reading. And the person who made the diet that I'm trying to follow, that's, kind of keto-ish at the beginning when you're following it strictly, is Norm Robillard. He has a series of books called the Fast Tracked Diet Books. And there's an official group on Facebook if people are interested. Anybody who's been suffering from digestive issues that might have to do with SIBO. Anyway, he, follows the work of many other people, of course, because he's an expert. And there's a doctor at Cedars-Sinai who does a lot of research by the name of Pimentel. And Pimentel has been interviewed by Chris Kresser, one of the paleo gurus. So this whole circle is interconnected, right? And again, I think what Robillard is kind of identified and that he's trying to make accessible to people is the principle behind why the paleo diet, why the keto diet, why the carnivore diet heals people up, which is the issue of the fermentation potential of carbohydrates. And anyway, he, I think, may have learned this from Pimentel. Pimentel, did I pronounce the name right? Who knows? I'm sorry. But at Cedars-Sinai, they've got a whole research lab, clinic, and everything that they do around digestion issues. And he says for this bacterial overgrowth, they recommend a low fermentation diet. So this is standard of care within parts of the medical community, at least now, but it's just starting. If I talk, like, I have 3 gastroenterologists I've spoken with, right? And one of them, at least, has said, oh yes, I've heard of this low fermentation. Of course, he happens to be also at a university, right? So research oriented, and that I think can make a difference sometimes. Anyway, the interesting thing that I learned was that you can start down this path from an episode of food poisoning. And it could be an episode of food poisoning that hadn't even created much in the way of overt symptoms. So
Wow.
yeah, so
You
you
don't even
could,
know you're developing this. Yeah.
yes. And so it's very important to make sure you've got good, wholesome food, apparently. And they have tests and everything that will show this, the Pimentel at Cedars-Sinai. But yeah, that's where it often starts. It also can get exacerbated by overuse of antibiotics. And then I think I may have had some mold going on too, some mold exposure contributing factor. Anyway, point being, I had to learn about all this myself and get off drugs and do diet. And it's not the easiest process, but I think in the long run, it's going to be much better for my health. So far, so good. Yeah, I'm too thin though. I understand.
Fingers crossed for you.
So
it would be nice if you picked up some weight. Yeah.
Are you trying any of this stuff? Because you've been also.
I have tried my very. I had a nice dinner just the other night, and all I did was eat the lamb. Okay. I left. There was a beautiful dessert that they gave us too, and I left the whole thing there. Yeah, so I'm trying to reduce my, particularly my sugar intake and the simple carb.
Sugar should be out.
Sugar should be out, and simple carbs.
Anybody with digestive issues, sugar should be out.
It's the sugar and the flour that really is, I think, the hardest on my own system. Let me put it that way.
I'm either in denial or it might be. Well, no. But I mean, I'm saying I'm not exactly sure. I have to do some experimentation. But I have been under the impression that bread is not actually that huge of an issue for me. That sugar, of course, is something that everybody should be avoiding for reasons like what I have going on. And really get your diet cleaned up now before you have any issues. I'm just telling people, because you think your diet's okay, but really a lot of our diets are kind of junky. Even if they're even in the top half of American diets, they still have too much junk in them. And then you're just vulnerable. And that's what I learned in the last year, that you're vulnerable to these kind of blips and what happens when antibiotics throw it off and everything. So, anyway, the thing you could always do is cooked veggies with your meats. You don't have to just totally go carnivore.
Yeah, I've got a good friend who has gone totally carnivore, as you know, and yes. I'm not sure. He's losing weight. He's looking great. He's got great energy.
If you have weight to lose, it's great.
Yeah, and my friends who are doing something like that report better mental clarity. Mm-hmm. All kinds of positive effects. I'm just not sure I could do the total carnivore.
I think I know the friend you have in mind, and I'm not sure that he went through just the meat and veggie phase.
He went straight to carnivore.
Yeah. And you can do just meat and veggies potentially.
Right.
What I'm learning though is that raw veggies can be an issue for people.
Oh, yeah.
More than just kind of people.
One of the things that people don't realize is that plants have evolved complex chemical defenses against being eaten by animals. And some of the poisons and toxic things in plants, bad mushrooms or oleander, they're the evolved defenses of those plants against being munched by animals. And yes. Raw vegetables, even the ones that are easier on us, often have things which, taken in large amounts, can be quite toxic. And if you think about it, vegetarians in particular, who, because they don't eat meat, and some of them don't even have any dairy, mm-hmm. They find themselves eating a lot of beans, soy.
Okay, you got cut off there. Okay, James is not coming through.
Oh, no.
Oh, there you are. Okay, now I see you. Okay, I don't know what happened. Okay, so you were talking about beans and then
vegetarians, to get the right amount of protein, have to eat a lot of beans, like soybeans and nuts, to balance out the not getting the meat, or even especially for those who don't even get dairy. There's really no other way to get significant protein except through beans and nuts. And people don't realize that there are toxic things in soybeans. They're toxic, and if you eat them in large amounts, that's when you really begin to get the buildup of these toxic things. So probably cooked vegetables. I tell the story of the California Native Americans. California Indians discovered that, because they're the great California oak trees, the California live oak, and they produce lots of acorns. Well, if you eat acorn mash raw, it'll kill you. It's toxic.
Wow.
And so the Native Americans had to learn how to strain and leach the mash from the acorns to a point where it was not toxic. It has to be strained like 7 or 8 times before it can even be digested by humans, but they did. So you can imagine the trial and error, right? The 6th one still kills you. No, 7 or 8, we live.
There are people that I know, and I think I'm actually one of them, and I didn't know this before. Iceberg lettuce is a trigger. Iceberg lettuce. So, you go to In-N-Out, you're going to do, your supposed near
Ooh,
carnivore,
I
and you're going to
love
get
In-N-Out.
your protein style thing. And I was doing this for a while, and they wrap it in iceberg lettuce. And even just that was causing me some problems.
Wow,
So now
wow.
I'm just, okay, half pound of beef, here I
Well, what
go.
is what is
And
lettuce though? I mean, it's little fiber and water, right? I mean, but it does
something
have,
about iceberg.
but there's chemicals in there. Yeah.
I spoke with a woman who told me that if she eats iceberg lettuce, it makes her vomit.
Wow.
Yes. I just
Wow.
never knew anyway. So yeah, I cook the veggies and I eat this, and I'm eating little bits of fruit. I'm trying dairy. Dairy doesn't seem to be my friend, but it's all the way that Robillard sets it up is you have this base of, proteins and fats, and then you do a little bit of this and a little bit of that, and you're experimenting. And, if anything is going to create symptoms, you're having such small quantities that it's not going to be horrible. And in the meantime, you're learning. And so you have to, it's like Mill's method of difference that we all learned in school, right? When you have the presence of the thing, there's an effect. And then if the absence of the thing, and you have to figure out how to do that.
Isolate the elements and introduce each element separately, right?
Yeah. So, I'm still, it's a work in progress, but at least I'm digesting enough of the proteins and the fats to keep going. Now, you froze up again, and I'm not sure why on the video here. So I'm hoping you'll be back again. I want to turn around to the main topic of today. Actually, we probably got a few topics, right? I know that James took one for the team this week and watched the Democratic debate, and he is prepared to talk about that. And I told him as we were messaging back and forth before the show, what I would like to do is, oh gosh, people are talking in the chat room about foods and stuff, different types of fruits and things. Yeah, the easiest to digest fruit is watermelon, apparently. So I've been having some of that. And I'll go for a little bit of berries. Okay, he's disconnected. Hopefully he's going to go ahead and try to reconnect with me here. Yeah, a little bit of berries and other types of things. Apples are one of the more difficult to digest fruits. Some people can handle them, like people in my position, if you skin them first. Skin them and it's easier. So these are the sorts of bizarre things, and I don't want to bore you with any more details. I want to go into topics of the show, and that because that's part of also what helps is just to focus on other things. Oh, apple seeds are poison, says Jennifer. Okay, don't tell me. I don't want to hear this stuff. I'm hoping that James will call back in and connect back in with me here in a minute. But as I said, he wants to talk about the debate. I want to do a couple things. I want to revisit None of the Above, right? This show is called None of the Above. Here we are. We're at the beginning of our second season. We've had a few shows and we haven't kind of revisited the theme. And there's an exchange that I had on Twitter the other day that made me want to revisit the topic and kind of put a little bit of a different spin and emphasis and angle on it. And we'll see if James comes along with the ride. He has a particular connotation of none of the above, as you know, with his book Creating Christ, that he's rather attached to. So okay, people are debating in the chat room now about what foods are poison and what foods are not. We'll have to take this debate offline. This is the perfect kind of thing that we can really go at a lot more length if you come to the donor and supporter hangouts that I've got. I'm going to be starting those. I'm hoping to maybe do them weekly. I've been holding off on committing to a big schedule of talking, in part because this condition that I have had kind of ripped up the esophagus and hurt the vocal cords and stuff. And so if I talk for too long, it actually gets to be a little bit painful and things like that. So I don't want to commit to a heavy schedule yet, but I will announce it soon when I think I can. In any event, I'm going to do a supporter hangout this next Tuesday. And what more I'm going to do next week with that, I'm actually thinking of starting some more stuff next week too, but I'm just a little hesitant to commit to it yet. So I just got to have a couple more days of success and feeling good, and then I'll go ahead and do that. I'm hoping James is going to rejoin me here. Oh, well, what I can do is I can revisit None of the Above for you guys a little bit and say what I was having in mind the other day. Okay, so the other day I'm out there on Twitter and I'm back, kind of doing the fight and everything. And I was joining an opinion author from the New York Times and criticizing Donald Trump for being an out of control spender, right? He's spending just like any of the worst liberals out there, right? He just spends and spends. And some people are looking at token things in the budget and saying, oh, well, he's touched the third rail of entitlements or something, maybe in some token way, there's a little bit of red meat that he's given you. And I am not convinced. And I think, and the other thing that people say is they say, well, he inherited this out of control spending. And so basically you can't blame him. And I'm saying, look, you say, okay, well, he doesn't have the power right now because he doesn't have the House and et cetera. He needs to be doing whatever he can be doing to get that spending under control. And if he's not able to do something, he needs to be able to say things that convince you that he's doing everything that he can do. And so he's not. And so I think this is totally fair game to criticize him for the out of control spending. And then I had this interlocutor on Twitter who disagreed. And this guy has always come around. Every time that I'm talking about Trump, he wants to come in and defend Trump in some small way. And, even if he agrees with my criticism, he's going to say something just to try to make this criticism not as blunt, just so it doesn't hit quite as hard. He always does this, right? And so then he posted a tweet in response to me the other day that got to me in a certain way because of the language. And let me see if I can find that for you, because I believe I saved it in my little files. Let me see. Yes, it's called Adventures on Twitter, I guess. No, I guess I did not save it. In any event, what he said in response to me was something to the effect of, well, we should be, and he says, what we should be doing is congratulating him for taking the steps that he is taking, and tell him, well, he should be taking even more. Okay, now I think I've got James back. Excellent.
I was struggling to get back to you.
Okay, well, I'm glad you're back. So I'm going through my little debate that I had on Twitter the other day.
Oh, okay.
And I told you a little bit about this, right?
Yeah.
So my interlocutor comes back and he says, that we should be giving kudos to Trump for the things that he's doing with the budget. And then we should be calling for more. And then we should also be criticizing him about tariffs, because this guy, he's supposedly a free market guy, right? This guy who's debating with me. And so he knows, and he says, well, I always criticize Trump on the tariff thing. But it's like every time I put something out there about Trump, which my criticisms are fair and legitimate, I don't go around like, oh, let's talk about his hair being orange, or let's talk about his supposed affairs or whatever.
Right,
I don't do those things at all.
Right.
And I just come in with policy and substance all the time, right? And so, today I corrected a grammatical error. I couldn't resist, but every so often I do that because I think
grammar Nazi.
Well, I mean, it's a little embarrassing when our president is misusing language in tweets like that. Sometimes I comment on that, but at least that's still substantive, right?
Yeah.
It's something that is a result of a choice that he's made, and I mean, I guess the hair is the choice he's made too, but whatever, people are doing their thing and I don't want to do physical appearance. So anyway, so this guy, he's always there, but this time the thing that got me is he said we should be speaking to Trump this way. This is how we. And so all I did was just point out the use of language, we. And he got it. This guy got it, right? Because he comes back and he says, oh, you shouldn't hold me to account for things that are just in informal tweets and blah, blah, blah. But language is language. And I always like to quote, I had the high school English teacher who said, life is one long reading test.
Right. That's a great one.
It really is, right? And so I'm always a person, again, I do this with Trump's tweets and stuff too, everything all the time. I used to shred Obama's speeches and just like analyze little bits of language. And so here's this guy, he's a fellow free market guy involved, supposedly defending capitalism. Because what he went on to say, I said, well, who's we? And he says, the defenders of capitalism. So he's telling me, okay, if you're a defender of capitalism, you should be speaking to our president this way.
Oh, really?
That really got me, right? That really got me. And, the thing that came to my mind, I've got this, my grandmother was just so awesome. And she was a lapsed Catholic. So you can appreciate that, James.
Yes.
But she used to say, among many other fun things, she used to say, don't should on me. Don't should on me. And I have a really good friend, decades-long friend, who's met my grandmother and everything. And she has that come to her mind. She was influenced by this as well. And anyway, so that came to my mind. He's shooting on me. This guy is shooting on me. And it's not, okay, so the way I think of this is not so much, oh, we shouldn't say like what people should do, right, in general. But if you're going to somebody and you're like putting the pressure on them and saying you should do this and you should do that, you're using shame.
Mm-hmm.
And this is what my friend who knows psychology the other day was telling me too. It's an issue of using shame. And it's also, the way I see it, it is absorbing, maybe not intentionally, a little bit of the authoritarian kind of vibe from Trump, right? It's like there's certain ways we should talk to Trump. And Rand had the great quotation that I love to put, I got to reboot the bot, by the way, but I love to put through the bot every so often, which is defiance, not obedience, is the American's response to overbearing authority. Defiance, not obedience, is the American's response to overbearing authority. It is perfectly right and legitimate to criticize a president if you are an American.
That's what it is to be an American. It's the ability to criticize your president and everything else about your government.
And of course, that quotation was taken from the essay, Don't Let It Go, which is the essay after which I've named the blog and the podcast that I have.
When someone shoulds on you, it implies almost an intrinsicism, what objectivists call intrinsicism. That is to say, an ignoring of context. While objectivists believe that there is an objective ethics out there, an objective right and wrong, so in a sense, there are times when you can morally judge and should morally judge people, like our president, based on a set of objective values. It still is the case that individuals have context. Yes. And when I tell you, what we should be doing, Amy, I'm implying that your context is the same as mine or no different, and that there's nothing for either of us to have to learn before we can do it right. The thing is, right. I know it. I have the revealed should that I can impose on you and anyone else.
Yes. Or our context is the same. And so therefore, if I'm deviating from what you think I should do, that I am dishonest or something else. This interlocutor on Twitter, who it remains nameless, but he never watches my show anyway, so I might as well name him, but no, I'm not going to. But he also has been lately saying, oh, you've lost all objectivity with regard to Trump. And he'll throw the word objective at me because he thinks, it's going to sting you. That's because word, right? you identify yourself as an objectivist. So if I tell you you're non-objective, I mean, it's verbal abuse, really, what this guy's doing, right? It's subtle.
Well, rather than exploring
it's mild,
your context,
but it's there,
right? But rather than saying, well, what is your context that makes you think that differently, or have a different set of shoulds in this context than I do? And think of it, it's a very, we're not talking about whether you should kill someone or steal something or try to tell a lie. Even what they're talking about is a political strategy. So we free marketers should all, instead of exploring what might be a perfectly valid context of yours, he's imposing and assuming that imposition is okay. That bugs me.
Yes, it really bothers me. So what that started me down the path of thinking about was a revisiting of the title of our show, None of the Above. And when we first started this show, and also, when I tried to use this title with your own, but he was not game for this title. I love this title, but
it was too negative. None of the above doesn't state a positive value. It just says no to what exists.
Right.
So,
and so obviously, there's a few different ways you could say we're not like anybody else, right? None of the above, none of the other Republican or Democrat or even libertarian. We're not any of those. It's also
I've never felt so none of the above as I have this week. Listening to Trump and then listening to the Democrats, none of the above, please.
Yeah.
There are a lot of Trump critics who are looking for a Democrat alternative they can vote for, and I have to say I am in that camp. The Democrats, in fact, had an opportunity this year, and they seem to be just screwing up so badly that they're going to go down in flames and hand Trump a re-election if they keep going down this path.
Probably. Yeah.
So what a shame, huh? There's no articulate opposition to Trump.
Well, and then we're going to get our socialized medicine under Trump, but we'll talk about that in a
Right.
Anyway, yeah. So none of the above. We've got the three, as I see it, kind of different connotations of it, right? So one of them is none of the above. We're not like anybody else. We're not Republicans. We're not Democrats. We're not libertarians. Yes, that's a negative connotation. Then we can go into the connotations that I think are actually a little bit more substantive, right? Instead of just saying not what we are. But yours is, none of the above with respect to religion. Now, I share it, of course. It just happens to be your specialty. And I do think the fact that I've been an atheist since I was 11 or 12 or something helps me be, kind of where I am today with respect to other types of none of the above connotations that we'll talk about. But no, I mean, this is a very important connotation. And I was inspired, of course, by the Duran Duran song, none of the above, right? Money, power, holy roads, freedom puts my faith in none of the above. And the, faith, of course, with respect to religion is something that we reject
it's a
as
statement
being part
of intellectual independence. That's how I mostly see it. And a statement of independence. It's not saying that we don't have positive values. It's just saying we're not satisfied with the existing alternatives. So it's an assertion of independence. And think for yourself maybe should be the, the subtitle, because that's really what none of the above means to me.
I do like that. And I remember that was a byline that we had talked about for marketing and all those things. So those are the sorts of things that we're going to have to start thinking about exploring again, right?
Yeah, definitely.
We're gonna have to start thinking about exploring those things. So what is the next connotation, right? And so the connotation that starts to come to my mind is authoritarianism. Now, you can have authoritarianism within religion, of course, but
that's what it is. A kind of epistemological authoritarianism. If it's anything other than reason, if there's any sort of mysticism, faith, and I don't care whether it's Ouija boards, tea leaf reading, astrology, divine revelation, it's a form of authority. It's a form of taking your emotions, or especially those of the assertions of someone else, as given, as opposed to your own judgment based on reason and the facts. So it's not necessarily a coercive authoritarianism, but it starts there. It starts with a mental authoritarianism where you've assigned your judgment over to some other authority.
Yes, definitely. And what I'm seeing then is in that statement, how we should be talking to Trump. And in all these people who are supposedly my allies, they call themselves objectivists or free marketers or whatever, they are coming at me with these shoulds. And these shoulds have two elements. One is judgment. But if you have judgment, you go ahead, just don't follow me on Twitter. Don't watch my show. Everybody should, of course, exercise moral judgment, but you don't come to somebody and put pressure on them and do this should thing, because that smacks of all of us having to step in line for Air Trump.
Right.
And that's
Right.
what I reject. So when I think of now, this none of the above, no authoritarianism. And it was interesting. I was speaking with Benjamin the other day, and I've got to pick his brain more on this because this is fascinating. He was talking about the fact that United States ended up being founded on individualism and the principle of individual rights being somewhat of an accident. And why? Because there were so many of the founders that were religious and did have sort of an authoritarian mindset. It's funny because I remember when I was a kid and I was thinking about religion, and I used to think really, and I think it's still kind of true, that it would be really hard to be very close to somebody who was really religious. And the way
I tell you right now, I couldn't. They couldn't. Let me put it this
Yeah.
way: I have friends who are Christians and Jews, even Muslims, but they can't be close friends. I can't. I'm sorry. There's a limit to how close you can be with me if you're going to be devoted to that kind of thing.
Well, and this is the way that I put it as a kid. I said the thing that I couldn't identify with is believing that there's a higher being, like always watching you. That was so foreign to me. And how could I relate to somebody really well who was walking around with that mind? That's the way that I put it when I was a kid, which is, kind of a funky way, but whatever. That's the way that I would think about it.
What a healthy thing for you to have avoided, because just the idea that the assumption that I'm being watched at all times, that even my inner thoughts are known to some deity up there, is a tremendously guilt-inducing and pressure-inducing concept. You've got, it's like your grandmother's looking over your shoulder at every minute or something.
Well, I wish, God, I wish, right?
Not your grandmother.
I was crying over my grandmother the other day.
Your grandmother.
I miss my grandmother.
Yeah.
Oh, my grandmother was awesome.
Yeah. I had some cool grandmothers too, so I guess I should have used a different example. But it is a kind of authoritarianism, isn't it?
Yeah, definitely. So, Benjamin was talking about the fact that it's kind of accidental, really, that we got this. But if you look at what we're really founded on, any element of authoritarianism is completely incompatible with individualism, upholding individual rights, the concept of freedom. That just none of that attitude should be any part of what we're doing. And
Right.
That's the thing that galled me so much the other day. I finally, recognized that, Jose is saying you can be close to a parent or sibling who's religious. Yes. But in terms of, sort of your soulmate, and it would be.
Well, even there, I would say that there's a closeness issue. There are certainly members of my family, like my grandmothers, who were one grandmother wasn't. Well, the other grandmother was religious, and I maintained a relationship with her until she died. But did affect how I spoke with her and how much she could see of me, and how much I was willing to totally open up to her, and so it affected our closeness.
Yes, and I could see exactly how it would. So no, so. It just shouldn't be any part of our thinking. And I'm probably going to try to write something more formal about this and just kind of get the thoughts a bit more organized. But, really, I want to emphasize the fact that to the extent that you feel that Trump is kind of our last ditch chance to save capitalism by the skin of its teeth or something, and you realize he's bad, but those Democrats, they're so much worse and whatever, and you're going to vote for that. There's two things. First of all, certainly don't get all excited about it.
Oh, for gosh sakes, that's the thing. That's the thing. It's if you question the hero worship of Trump, you've got Trump derangement syndrome. That's the interesting paradox. That's why any little criticism, your friend will say, okay, I criticize him on tariffs, but ... So it's the uncritical view of Trump that they regard as somehow Trump derangement syndrome, as well as Orange Man and all that. And that's not right. I can, even if I were to think, the fact that I would say it works two ways. The fact that Trump is so bad doesn't mean that the best thing the Democrats have to offer is good enough. Just because the Democrats are so awful doesn't mean that Trump is good enough.
No, no. So these people might not deserve your vote, but they certainly don't deserve your enthusiasm.
Yeah.
Exactly. And and then it's one thing if you're going to go be enthusiastic about him. I mean, I'm not going to tell you what to do. And
Right.
that's the thing, this interlocutor of mine on Twitter, I don't go around saying you should do this and you should do that. Don't shit on me about this stuff, right? Not about this politics stuff.
Oh, yeah.
Because we are in a situation where and I'm going to give you a couple tweets and stuff from Trump. Well, actually, at least just one tweet from him, and then a question about something that Sanders raises. But, he is not good. He's not good. And he is doing things supposedly as a representative of capitalism, business, and the free market and everything else. And they aren't those policies. They are protectionist, they're socialists, they're everything else.
Last week, some of the things we covered with Keith, jawboning the Fed to have zero or near zero interest rates, or $1 trillion a year deficits, getting along with the Democrats to lift spending caps. And okay, that's the defense of capitalism and freedom. Even with regulation, okay, so he eases up on some energy regulations, and that does have the positive effect of helping energy production in the United States. But simply saying, okay, he's a hero on regulation is wrong. It's not like someone's actually cutting into major regulatory schemes that already exist. Trump is preserving those. Regulations are increasing at a slower rate than they would, say, under a Democrat, perhaps. But that doesn't mean we're getting rid of swaths of regulation at a time. People exaggerate tremendously the free market defense that Trump allegedly is giving us, just as they exaggerated the defense of previous Republicans.
I understand, right? Because I've talked about this before, that there's a sense in which it is inspiring, that it can help keep you going, even to see just somebody who's decent in politics. Right.
Right.
So, and this is when I used to talk about the value, for example, of a Ted Cruz giving a quote filibuster, even though it wasn't going to have any effect, on the floor of the Senate. He was better then. I was thought anyway, right? And it was inspiring to see that. And there's a little bit of fuel. Now, it's not art, but it is, some person doing. So, for instance, now I've got Josh Yokela, who's up in New Hampshire, and he's a freshman representative in their state house, and he is trying to do some real things. And it is awesome if you can see a real politician in the real world do a little bit of
Well, I think it's important.
I think it's important
in this context to yes, it does. And I think it's important in this context that we allow ourselves to be inspired by politicians doing things, even if we don't fully agree with the rest of it. In other words, I may not hero worship the man, but I might enthusiastically get behind his proposal. I have a hard time getting enthusiastically behind any politician these days. I guess that's consistent with the none of the above, because we're really just not represented properly by anyone in politics. And that's unfortunately the case. But still, you're right. There's a psychological need. And I think that explains part of the psychology of people wanting to defend Trump.
Right. So then I was saying, yes, you can understand that they're desperate for this. And then, of course, Trump is a great troll. And then he really, some of those liberals are really disgusting. And so then he, does some things that make them squirm.
And I can laugh at some of what Trump does. I can even, cheer at a few things Trump does. That doesn't change the overall context.
No. So he's, and so, but the point is overall, he's not good. So I'll give you just two things that came on my radar in the last 24 hours from Trump. One of them was from a video clip that Amash tweeted out there. And it was Trump complaining about the Oscar-winning movie this year for Best Movie. Why? And this is what Trump emphasized, okay? You tell me it's a lousy movie or whatever. He didn't talk about how good or bad the movie was. The only thing was it was from South Korea and it should have been an American winning the best movie.
Nuts. Just nuts. That's the kind of arrogant jingoism that really bothers me about him. It really does.
No, I had to watch the clip because I was like, is Amash really right that this is really what it is, that it's that bad? And sure enough,
That's
it was
what it
that
is.
bad.
Yeah, no.
Yeah.
No, he's a made in America kind of guy. There's no question. You know, Dr. Binswanger wrote that brilliant article.
Buy
How
American,
many decades?
right?
Yeah, is un-American.
Mm-hmm.
It's un-American. You buy the best product. You buy what works for you. You don't buy something just because it's made in America.
No.
That's irrational. That's a form of collectivism and mysticism.
Exactly. So there's that. And this was him at a rally just the other day, I guess. And then the other thing is this tweet that he sent out this morning about the farmers, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I'm telling you, all you people who watch me, right? And you say, oh my God, you know, really, he's a Randian hero and blah, blah, blah.
Yikes.
This tweet of Trump's is out of Atlas Shrugged. Yes, it is. It's right out of Atlas Shrugged, but not from a hero. Not at all from a hero. And so let me find this here. Somebody on Twitter's got a logo that looks suspiciously like the PayPal logo. I wonder if that's going to get some trade dress complaints here. Okay, here we go. All caps from Trump. Okay, all caps. If our formally, that was the typo, formally, Formally,
Formerly.
when he meant formerly. If our formerly targeted farmers need additional aid until such time as the trade deals with China, Mexico, Canada, and others fully kick in, that aid will be provided by the federal government, paid for out of the massive tariff money coming into the USA.
You know, it's new money coming from overseas into America, right? It's not American money being taxed on Americans by
Confiscated.
Americans. Right.
Sorry, you know, when I do these tweets, right, it's a game. I think Twitter's kind of a game. I told you, I'm trying to get you onto it, right? I was going to call the segment, we should have a segment called like Amy's Adventures on Twitter or something like that. But and then each time I'm going to be trying to convince you, come on, join in the game. But so you know,
you got a better constitution, a more iron stomach than I do.
But you know, probably I don't, right? And I just am like, I was going to say the other title I was thinking of this morning for a segment like this was Amy's self-flagellation on Twitter.
Amy's Adventures in Masochism.
Self-flagellation is way better than just saying masochism. Okay, so because I'm telling you, very precise with my words here. Self-flagellation it is. So like I said, I couldn't resist making a comment on the language. I said, you know, targeted by guys in tuxedos, I guess, right? Formal. These tuxedo-clad guys are targeting the poor American farmers, right? Right. And of course, you know, they're targeting by, you know, not offering them a market. If you don't buy my goods, you're targeting me, right?
Yeah, a foreign market, mind you. Anyway, the American government has to guarantee.
You can nitpick this language like all day long, right? So, but I just made the one point. I said the tariff money is not coming into the U.S. It is confiscated from Americans.
Precisely.
And this is how I describe what he's doing here. I said it's just another liberal redistribution scheme disguised as patriotism. Exactly. And that's what he's doing.
Exactly.
Right?
Exactly. No, you can complain about the protectionism from other countries, their tariffs and their subsidies.
Yes.
But then we do tariffs and subsidies so that they correct themselves.
They shoot themselves in the foot, and so we're going to shoot ourselves in the foot too.
Exactly. Absolutely.
As long as it also hurts them, we'll shoot ourselves in the foot. Right.
Exactly. Does it hurt them at all? We'll take a big hurt if it hurts them this much, because that's what's going on with the tariff, right?
Exactly. So, I'm telling you again, and that this is something I didn't address in my response to him, but the tone of this, I mean, first of all, it's all big brother-ish, you know, yeah, get behind me. This is, you know, let's be enthusiastic about helping our farmers, right? first of all, he's trying to get that segment of the population, farmers, in his camp to reelect him, right?
Yeah.
And then
This
it's
is unbelievable that a free
distortion.
market person could be saying that even temporary subsidies to a specific kind of business is a good thing. I mean, what is going on in your head that you think, okay, well, sometimes strategically we need to do, no. If we ever strategically need to do something that is immoral on the face of it, that is wrong on the face of it, there's something wrong with our own theory.
Yes, definitely. And that's what he is trying to hide, with all of these obfuscations, right?
Yeah, right.
It's paid for out of the massive tariff money coming into the USA. It's not coming in. It's being confiscated from Americans here at
Only
home.
Americans are paying that.
This is a redistribution scheme to help out the farmers to get Trump reelected.
That's right.
And yet
So the consumers of
selling
foreign
it
goods are being ripped off so that we can subsidize a narrow segment of our economy that's being hit by Trump's tariff policy.
Yes. So why not?
That's it.
But it's being sold to us as this patriotic, caring about America thing, and it's right out of Atlas Shrugged. One of the villains,
Absolutely.
the villain politicians in Atlas Shrugged could have put this tweet out there.
Absolutely.
Easily.
Agreed.
So he's not that good, people, right? So don't tell me how I should be talking. So this interlocutor guy, he comes back and says, yes, Amy, you had a valid criticism. Like, yes, my criticisms are valid. Hello. And maybe sometimes you disagree with me, but my criticism coming from my context has reasons and it's valid.
Right.
It's whether you agree with all the premises, it's logically valid at least. So, so that was one thing. And then here's something, and we're going to kind of be able to segue into debate land with this one. There's a clip that Bernie Sanders put out there from the debate, I guess, where he says healthcare is a human right. He says healthcare is a human right, not something to make billions in profits from. And my question is this, and all you Trump supporters, be with me here. I said, I'd like to know how Trump is going to answer this when it comes up in debate. And I said, even Senator Ted Cruz, who filibustered Obamacare in the Senate in 2013, floundered on this. And how do I know he floundered on this? Because remember, he had that debate with Bernie Sanders about healthcare. And I wrote a blog post about this. If you go to don'tletitgo.com, you'll probably be able to find it under a Cruz post or something. Yeah. But I quoted at length and highlighted the relevant portions.
I remember.
It took Sanders nailing that, hitting that question on Cruz a couple times before Cruz would even start to address it. And then he wouldn't say, no, healthcare is not a right. He deflected and went to something called access.
And Trump, I would imagine, is going to be even more than Cruz in that regard.
No, he'll be worse. I mean, because he doesn't have the equipment that Cruz has.
Exactly. But he also has stated already that he believes it is the government's responsibility to make sure that all Americans at least have available to them good health insurance access. So it's the government's duty to provide somehow everybody with some kind of health insurance, in effect, is what Trump has already said. So, I would hate to disappoint Bernie, Comrade Bernie, but it seems to me that Trump has already conceded that case to him.
Yes.
That healthcare is a right and that the government.
Yeah, and of course, he promises in all the tweets when they even talk about potentially getting rid of Obamacare that they're going to continue to cover pre-existing conditions.
Oh, yeah, among other things. Pre-existing condition, the Democrats with their dishonest approach say, oh, well, Trump can't be supporting pre-existing conditions. He's in court fighting Obamacare, which happens to have as one of its provisions pre-existing conditions. That doesn't mean Trump isn't opposed to that one aspect of it. Quite the opposite. So they're trying to fool people into thinking Trump doesn't believe in pre-existing conditions when Trump actually has made it quite clear that he is in favor of government making sure that insurance companies insure regardless of pre-existing conditions.
Insure. There is no, and I've talked about the health insurance is actually
what does insurance even mean if there's pre-existing conditions, right?
Well, and even without that, I mean, what we have right now is like prepaid vouchers for healthcare you might get or not. It's like
basically that's it.
You have a coupon code. That's basically what you get for your health insurance premium is a coupon code. So if you're right, and I'm going to ask you, you know, to sort of explain to the audience why you told me what you told me in the moments before we got on, which was that you thought that these Democrats are pretty hopeless and that they're going to basically give the election to Trump. If you're right, what I fear, and I think it's a realistic fear, is that, you know, we'll have him as president, and then we'll have at least one, the House or the Senate, continue to remain Democrat majority.
Well, I think a lot of that might depend on who is at the top of the ticket. Some of the fear on the Democrat side is that if Sanders does get the nomination, that he would be disastrous for the down ballot races, and that it could devastate the Democrats in congressional races and on the state level. And that, I think, makes a certain, I'm hoping at least, that Bloomberg is right about this point, that by nominating Sanders, it would be a disaster for the Democrats. Now, if they did, I'll go this far, Amy. If Sanders gets nominated and he goes down and brings the Democrats down in flaming defeat, that might be a healthy object lesson for the Democrats and for the American people as a whole.
Right.
That America is not really comfortable with the socialist label and a revolutionary approach. Now, on the other hand, what a shame that Trump should be the beneficiary of that object lesson, eh? That it should happen right at this moment. It seems to me that listening to the debate, that what we have is a billionaire fascist in the form of Bloomberg and a multimillionaire communist in the form of Sanders. I don't see much moral difference between Mr. Bloomberg and Mr. Trump. Honestly, I don't. And here I may differ from your own Brooke, who sort of sees Bloomberg as a capitalist, as opposed to the rest of the Democratic field who are hardcore socialists. I think Bloomberg has cashed in all of his I mean, I can admire, let me put it this way. One can admire what Mr. Bloomberg did as a businessman and still think he would be a rotten, intolerable politician. Right. Einstein may have been a genius, but I don't go to Einstein for politics.
Right.
So I can admire someone for what they did in some other way or in some other field without thinking they'd be a decent politician. And I think this is true, especially for Mr. Bloomberg. I agree that Bloomberg's business achievements are superior to Trump's, that he was a greater, more productive in his accomplishments in making his fortune. But I think Mr. Bloomberg is under the skin an authoritarian. He really does not understand.
Well, he's the one who brought us the soda ban, right?
Yeah. Oh, and when you think about, when he was mayor of New York City, and then the comments he's made afterwards in defending and then coming off of, even criticizing, saying we should have gotten rid of stop and frisk. Even with that, what he's doing is making it very clear to me that he's cashed in any free market principles that he might have once even implicitly held. It's true he's critical of Bernie Sanders' approach to healthcare, right? But he's no different than Trump in my view. Worse in some ways.
I will provide universal health care more efficiently than the next guy. That's
exactly right.
That's all, that only debate that they're having.
Right. His proposals, for example, that he made earlier this year on regulating Wall Street have been compared to Senator Warren and Senator Sanders' own plans to regulate Wall Street. So Bloomberg, although he's a businessman from New York, he's all over regulating Wall Street like the most extreme leftist in the party today is. I don't get the concept. I don't see why I should vote for Bloomberg over Trump or Trump over Bloomberg, because they're ideologically much the same thing as far as I'm concerned.
Well, so then maybe the only differentiating factor is that under Bloomberg, it would be done in the name of the Democrat Party, liberals, whatever, leftists, and maybe there would be some Republican opposition. Those are, but and those are the kind of things where, okay, maybe that's going to be part of your calculation as to whether you want to vote for one or the other, but it's nothing to get excited about.
No. And it's a really tricky thing to build into your thinking about how to vote too. Maybe
gridlock.
Right, exactly. And
maybe gridlock, maybe misrepresentation of capitalism. These are the sorts of places where we're having to, make bets, because in substance, the candidates are virtually identical anymore. Right.
I mean, the comments from 2015 from Bloomberg are just so distressing. How do you get guns out of the hands of people? You throw them up against a wall and you frisk them.
Yeah.
Yeah, of course we were the cops were all sent to minority neighborhoods because that's what all the crime is. Of course we were putting young people away from marijuana. Oh my God, the guy is not a good man.
Okay, so here's the thing. So you think there's some chance that we'll get a Trump and that Trump could actually retake both chambers if they nominate Sanders and if that has the effect that people are predicting? I was thinking that because the Democrats seem so motivated right now and they just really don't like Trump so much, that if Trump wins, there's going to be at least one, the House or the Senate,
I think a
going
lot
to remain
depends.
Democrat.
I think a lot on that score depends upon who the Democrats have at the top of their ticket, who they nominate. If that is perceived as a less of a radical than Bernie Sanders, that may be the case. If it's Bernie Sanders, he could have a devastating impact down
See,
ballot.
I just thought he's so good at motivating and getting, because there's all these people.
People are comparing Trump and Sanders, right? They're both populists.
Mm-hmm.
They're both people that came in from the outside and that the establishment of their party wants to, opposes. And notice the similarities too. When Trump ran, he only had a plurality, and Republicans would say, well, look, if you count all the other candidates, it beats Trump. So most of the Republicans want someone other than Trump. The Democrats are saying the exact same thing. Oh, well, Sanders may be in the lead. He may have the most, but when you put all the others together, they beat Sanders. The big difference is that Trump is not an ideologue. He wasn't a free market extremist, if you will.
Right.
Like Sanders is a socialist extremist.
Yes.
So there is a breakdown, as far as I'm concerned, with the comparison.
Okay.
Actually, Trump is much more like Bloomberg, a middle-of-the-road guy, a pragmatist with authoritarian tendencies.
So basically, Trump is like cotton candy. And because he's got it's the kind of pure, people get stirred up and enthusiastic, but there's no substance there, right? So it's just
he's
like
fermentation and a blood sugar spike.
Actually, it is. We can get technical about that again. But if it's just pure sucrose, I think, or glucose or whatever, then that's okay. Like somehow it digests really quickly, and so it doesn't ferment, which is weird. But it does other things. It feeds the bacteria and
right
spikes your blood sugar. So there's too much nuance to this stuff. I
yes, I'm sorry, I was a poor analogy.
It's okay. but just like kind of all fluff, right? And so then
yes.
So then we've got Sanders, and so Sanders is like a sticky sweet frosting a little bit on top, because people are sort of enthusiastic about him in the way that people are enthusiastic about Trump, right? So there's that I don't know why for either of them, but whatever, there's this appeal, right? And there's a lot of people who are very motivated, feel the burn and all this. But then sort of there's a cake underneath, and that cake is also maybe somewhat tasty, but really kind of poisonous.
Sanders certainly has what enthusiasm there is on the Democratic side. Most of the enthusiasm, the young people and the emotion, and although they're not Trump's crowds, what crowds can be gathered. Sanders appears to have the enthusiasm factor. On the other hand, Trump's appeal was that he was a Republican who was now saying things that Labor Democrats had said. He was now appealing to your anti-immigrant, pro-tariff labor union type. That was the secret to getting Pennsylvania and Michigan for Trump. It wasn't that he had moved to the right with the free market. See, now Sanders needs to get Pennsylvania and Michigan back and then make inroads into the Republican parts of the Electoral College map. How's he going to do that with his crowd? When you look at the polls, the general polls, they would show that he's going to be clobbered in places where Democrats should do well, right? If Sanders is the nominee.
Okay.
I'm convinced that despite his, I
think a lot of people might actually then vote Trump and then some Democrat to balance Trump out.
The real world impact is that when it looks like the Republican's going to win, Democrats stay home, and that will depress turnout on their side, and therefore the votes that the down ballot candidates should get. Okay. People splitting their tickets does happen, but it's less so than a lot of people realize. The bigger impact is whether or not Democrats stay home or sit on their hands, or whether Republicans stay home and sit on their hands. Trump, his magic was that he got a whole bunch of Obama voters to vote for millions of people who voted for Obama.
Okay, but so for
Trump.
example, I know one person who was a Sanders supporter, and then when Sanders did not get the nomination, he voted for Trump.
Right.
But it's only because Sanders didn't get the nomination. If Sanders had, he would have been all Sanders.
All Sanders. That's true. And I think there is a segment that would be like that. There were some Bernie bros who did go for Trump. I think Trump, though, has solidified his position with some of the Republican base in a way he hadn't before. Democrats with that Christianity Today article were hoping that evangelical support for Trump could be undermined because of his personal ethics or something, or his own, New York values. Wrong.
All they care about is overturning Roe versus Wade.
That's it. And Trump has given them the judicial nominations, and that will forgive just about anything.
Okay, so give me your impressions from the debate. I'm going to actually have to cut it short fairly soon, but I want to hear why you think they're just all kind of hopeless, and that there's not going to be a really good contender against Trump.
They are not. Well, if I was a Democrat, I would be talking issues right now. I would be, I'd be talking healthcare. I'd be talking things in which the Republican was perceived as weak, right? And which there is at least a political base of support. Mm-hmm. The Democrats are not focused on issues. The debate the other night was a slugfest, the rolling around in mud, hitting each other, and they're getting harsher about each other. They're not. It's true that the Republicans had fiery debates when Trump was running, but at the end of the day, Trump was enough of a Republican to get enough of the base and enough of a labor Democrat to get others. And frankly, Trump has increased his support, I think, among the evangelical base, has continued to cultivate various parts of the Democrat base, such as I think African Americans are going to vote at least as strongly as they did for Trump. I think Hispanics are going to surprise Democrats, and a third to 40% will vote for Trump, quite possibly. I'm just guessing here, but based on the evidence as we have it, the Democrats are losing their own bases of support, while Trump is actually solidifying his own, from what I can see, while the Democrats are simply bickering with one another rather than focused on issues. While the Republicans were bickering when Trump ran, it was about substance. It was about immigration and tariffs and so forth. There was a substance to it that is lacking, in my view.
A substance to it, yeah. I remember not being impressed with the depth of the substantive discussion. It wasn't very, sometimes, but at least they were on it. Yeah.
At least they were about issues as opposed to about each other.
Yes.
Hey, Mr. Bloomberg, why don't you let those women free from those non-disclosure agreements so they can tell us how you harassed them?
I heard that one.
And so long as they're going after, Bloomberg, Bernie, you can't be elected. You're going to take the party down. Well, Mr. Bloomberg, you're a billionaire who, with all your friends who wants to buy the election. That sort of puts the Democrats into a schizophrenic mode. There's going to be a part of the Democratic Party that will be alienated, whichever one it is.
Okay. Interesting. So
there's another debate next week. Bloomberg, I suppose, has a chance to sort of pull it out. But if Bloomberg was supposed to be their moderate knight in shining armor who would save them from Sanders, he needed to shine. And their knight in shining armor did not shine.
Is it really true then that, basically the only one who can hurt Trump is Trump? This is something that Ben Shapiro says all the time.
Agreed.
And basically he can do a whole lot to hurt himself and still not lose. Is that really true?
Trump, when he ran the first time, said I could walk down Fifth Avenue and shoot someone,
that's what I'm thinking
and my fans would let me get away with it. The question is just that. People are willing to let Trump, his own supporters are willing to let Trump actually get away with quite a lot. That's true. And a lot of people would vote for Trump, even if they were uncomfortable about his style, the way he puts people down and demeans people, those kind of things. Right. And Bloomberg is he's just like Trump. He's that obnoxious and that unpleasant. Bernie Sanders on the other hand, is too ideologically consistent, I think, for to beat Trump. Trump could defeat himself, I suppose. I won't say that there isn't an outer limit to what Trump could do, but most of Trump's support is very forgiving of Mr. Trump and his personality quirks, for sure.
Okay.
And those evangelicals, all they really care about is the judicial nomination.
Yes, yes. And I'm not sure if we talked about it last week, but recently we got the news out of Utah, right? That they are requiring that fetal remains be buried in the state of Utah. And the reason that that's important is because insofar as there are a constellation of laws all across the country, each of which treats a fetus as a person with respect to some little detail like this, when a appropriate case comes up in which the Supreme Court is asked to reconsider Roe versus Wade, it is going to potentially once again engage in that stupid pragmatic balancing test that the court engaged in Roe versus Wade, the interest of the state versus the interest of the individual woman in making personal decisions, blah, 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 right?
Yep.
And that's, they don't talk about whether a fetus has a right to life in Roe versus Wade. That question was never addressed. The Supreme Court punted in favor of this pragmatic privacy concept, which, I've done enough
Well, I wonder,
complaining about that.
apart from health issues, why does the government regulate who needs to get buried anyway?
Yeah, there's that as well, right?
Obviously, all they're doing it for here is to assert that a fetus has the same rights as, born people.
Yes.
That's the only function. That's the only.
And there are safe ways to dispose of remains that don't involve burial.
Of course, like animal remains or something. Exactly. I mean, I don't mean to just be crudely comparing, but the point is, with unless there's really some urgent life and death health issue, why is the government telling people that their pets or their fetuses or their grandmother needs to be buried in a certain way?
It questions all that. But what they're going to do is they're going to use that as one more little piece of evidence that Roe versus Wade should be overturned, because that has been an explicit part of the strategy of the religious conservatives ever since. Right. And there was a book that I reviewed years and years ago. The book is by an author named Hadley Arks. It's called Natural Rights and the Right to Choose. And somehow, I don't know who nominated me, but I got an invitation to review it for this journal called Ethics. And then I talked about this. But yeah, their strategy is to look at the way that balancing test was conducted in Roe versus Wade and provide as much ammunition as possible so that the balance that they engage in comes out differently this time. Right. And I think there's a good chance,
as we know,
will.
Absolutes, right? Everything is a balancing act.
Yeah. So if this is true, if Trump gets elected and then he's got Republican majorities as well, you can really just say goodbye to Roe versus Wade.
I hope not. I hope that even the Republicans, the conservatives that he's put onto the Supreme Court will have enough respect for stare decisis.
Well, and that's, my interlocutor on Twitter comes back and says, well, they know it's political suicide, but Supreme Court justices don't care about political suicide because they have appointments for life.
Right.
And so suppose Trump appoints someone and suppose he doesn't want to, be deemed to have committed political suicide, right? He appoints. And so to the evangelicals, he gets the credit. And then to everybody else, he says, well, I just appoint, the originalist good judges and I can't control what they do and blah, 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 blah. And then boom, Roe versus Wade is gone.
Well, we do need to know how Gorsuch and Kavanaugh are going to feel about the issue.
And we don't know, right?
We don't really know about those guys.
I'm pretty sure I don't like Kavanaugh, but I would have more hope for Gorsuch. But
I'm much more favorably predisposed to Gorsuch in his philosophy so far.
But actually, with respect to abortion, that might be opposite because I can't predict these guys.
But what is true is that if Trump gets reelected, he is going to replace Ruth Bader Ginsburg, and that will dramatically affect the ideological composition of the Supreme Court. Yes. Dramatically, because it's no longer will be 5-4 on most. It might even get to 6-3, and that would give them on certain issues a lot more wiggle room and leeway. That would dramatically move the court in a conservative direction.
Yeah.
So whoever does get elected in November will replace Ruth Bader Ginsburg.
Yes. Yes. So that is one thing that we can think about among many as we kind of go through this election year. I think we are going to end up drawing a line here. Oh, I had an interesting piece of good news, because remember I was asking for, we wanted a show based on good news, and then I saw a story in New York Times, and it was presented, kind of specifically as a good news, a feel good story that we all kind of need. By the way, coronavirus, are you keeping up on this? What's
A little bit, yeah.
should we be more worried, or not really yet, or what do you? What's your
I'm
thought?
still in suspension on it.
Okay.
It doesn't appear to be fatal in a huge number of cases, but it does appear to be widespread and easily spread. So it may have the dimensions of a pandemic, but what the fatality statistics from that pandemic will be, I think, are still up in the air. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does. And the headline, when I just went to New York Times, let's see, I want to sort by newest. Okay, I'm going to find my story here in a second. Oh gosh, it's not even showing it to me. Oh, here it is. Yay. Here's a picture of the border collie. So they have this really cute story about a border collie who is insanely smart. And they're burying it under coronavirus stories, which is making me mad. Because they've presented this as the story that at least you're going to feel a little bit better. Okay, here it is. Here it is. Yay. Please, where is it? Okay, here. Whiskey, the Norwegian Wonder Dog. It's a border collie that's so smart, she knows not only the names of her toys, but also the categories they belong to. And the number of names that she knows is amazing. I think it's 59 different toys. So they did some research on this dog, and the owner of this dog is not a professional dog trainer even. It's just they play games with this dog with all the toys, and they assign names to them. But then some professionals came and did some research. During the research, it says Whiskey proved in tests that she knew the names for at least 54 of her 59 toys.
Wow. I thought that Holly, my wife, was with one of her dogs. She actually had several different signals that the dog would give her depending on what the dog wanted. And I thought 5 or 6 was a huge.
No, I mean, they have more of a vocabulary than we think.
Yeah.
But no, this is amazing. And apparently there have been dogs before that even do better. There was another border collie, they say, named Chaser, who knew the names of more than 1,000 objects.
Wow.
Now this dog with the 59 or 54 or whatever.
I don't know if I'd say that's fully conceptual, but they at least have some kind of a vocabulary where they identify things. So
right, but imagine at least also having kind of a hierarchy where you know the names of the individual objects, and then you also know that they belong to categories.
See, that's the part that I want broken down. I want to see
you want to see more of that. Okay.
Yeah, I want to see how they know that, as opposed to it just not being another association, simple association.
Yes. Okay. So maybe we need to look more about that.
Can I say, Fido, bring me all the triangles?
Right. Something like that. Oh no, you just got cut off. Well, maybe it's about time then. So I will, so cut. Oh, there you are. Okay. You had just been cut off. So it says, Whiskey, this dog had 10 balls, 7 rings, 4 ropes, and 4 frisbees. Since the names of the objects always included a specific adjective and a general noun, like small frisbee, Dr. Fugaza wanted to test if Whiskey had gotten the idea of what a frisbee was, what a ball was, in a general abstract way. So what they did with the experiment, it says they went to Whiskey's home. The initial test, Whiskey fetched most of her toys successfully. Then, for the category test, Fugaza would try her on 4 new toys at a time, first letting her play with the new toys with the owners in one test, or just explore them herself in another test. Then the doctor set up the group of toys in one room while she and the owners waited in the kitchen. One of the owners would ask Whiskey to bring a ball or a rope. She was successful about 50% of the time, it says. So there's 4. She's successful 50% of the time. So it's not perfect, right?
What I would want is a frisbee that was a frisbee, but looked totally different than all the other frisbees. Or I would want whiskey to trigger on a picture of a Frisbee. Those are the kind of things that would sort of indicate to me that there's a category that whiskey's got, as opposed to, well, that is kind of like this thing and is associated with this thing. Because I'm just bringing you this thing.
Right. Yeah. Now I
But
wonder.
I don't know. I honestly don't know.
No, and I also wonder with, because of course the owners didn't train the dog to this. The only thing that
Right.
the owners really trained the dog was more for the individual objects, right?
Right.
But maybe with a bit more training, because it is true that kids need to learn how to categorize as well, right? To recognize, for instance, all the instances of a circle versus square and stuff like that. So it might just be that the dog needs 50% means
I was
it's
impressed.
higher than you would expect that if
Yeah.
the dog didn't understand the category.
Exactly. We've gotten to the point where now it's interesting, at least. Yeah.
Yeah, because there's 4 different ones, and 50% of the time they're getting the right one.
Right.
So that's not bad. And it's just a cool thing about our world that we can note and be happy about. And
whiskey is an amazing dog, whatever the conceptual nature of whiskey's identifications.
Yes. So we will leave you with that little bit of good news. Milton Keynes, as he calls himself in the chat room, says, doesn't knowing the categories imply conceptualization? Yeah, maybe at some level. And then the question is, if there's any conceptual ability at all in a dog, do we therefore assign it rights? And this is another debate for another day. Yes. For now, we are just going to marvel at whiskey and that there are so many wonderful things in the world that we can appreciate. And we will talk again next week. Thank you so much, James. And thank you, everybody, for tuning in.
Take care.
Get over and hit the little end meeting.